Hey, recording started. Welcome to the study hall for January 30th. We are talking about critical reasoning questions dealing with things that must be true. And we have just finished going over the rules of the study hall, and we are going to get started. Copyright acknowledgement. The practice problems on today's slides are all from the GMAT prep software. There are no noted otherwise today, so they're all from GMAT prep. And they are all from the free part of GMAT prep. They're not paid question-packed questions because we are not bad people. Okay, let's talk about a problem. How about this one? Here's a timer. And remember where answers to multiple choice questions are found, namely here. Go for it. Okay, if you have not answered the question, please answer the question. Remember that you got to give some sort of answer of some type here. So even if you are completely and totally guessing, you still have to actually produce a guess. And you got to get used to that. So we are kind of all over the place on this thing. Let's take a look. If your name is, I guess there's two Annas here. If those are actually different people, then lowercase Anna, you got to guess this thing. And Maria, you are the only person without an answer. Okay, so let's take a look. Here are the choices that you picked. There we are. Okay, so we are just all over the place here, ladies and gentlemen. We are everywhere. So let's take a look. There's nothing even sort of resembling a majority here. There are two decently popular answers, and that's really about it. So anyway, what is going on here? So the deal with today is that we're talking about this type of question, broadly speaking, that looks like this. So when you talk about questions like this, if the statements above are true, which of the following must also be true? So let me give you a quick example of this. It'll show up on the screen. Before we talk about the question on the board, let me give you a little bit of a simpler example, just to make sure that we are all oriented properly to this task. So here is something that is a little bit simpler. You will see it show up in a second. So here. Okay, quick exercise to make sure we're on the same page. Smith has eaten at restaurant X 20 times this year, each time paying at least $50. 19 of these times Smith has bought seafood, paying an average of $75. What can you infer from these lines? So let's go ahead and use your multiple choice answers for this really quick, just to make sure. This will be A instead of 1. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, right? So go ahead and pick answer choices for this one. And then we'll talk about the task at hand here and exactly what it is that we have to do. Okay, can you guys see on the board? If you're going to make it a little bigger. If you totally can't see what's on the board, then I don't know exactly how to help you. But if you can't see it, you may just have to wait a second for it to load. That may actually be the problem. But if it's all white I don't know what the story is there. If you see the A, the B, and the C, it's probably just, you're probably just waiting for the graphic to load, because the rest of the class can see it. So, okay. All right, so a few of you guys still don't have anything here. DR, pick something, Muhammad, Fumi. All right. So, well, all right, here we go. So here are the answers that people picked. This one. We'll come back to the other one in a sec. So here it's pretty clear what's going on, at least to most people it seems. So we have a strong majority in favor of A. Let's take a look. So notice the wording of the question is a little bit different this time, but the task is the same. So let's talk about what you can and cannot do here. So what is choice 1 or choice A here? Well, if you think about what choice 1 or A is in this task, choice 1 is something that seems interesting because, you know, we're actually talking about something we haven't really talked about up there, which is preferences of Smith. So, I mean, choice 1 is it's more interesting, it's more engaging than choice number 2. But if you think about it, at the end of the day, choice 1 is just a guess. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm talking about choice 2. I'm being backwards right now. Choice 2 or B is more interesting than choice 1. Like, choice 1 is sort of boring, and we're just talking about something that we've already been talking about. But choice 2 is interesting. Like, choice 2 talks about what Smith likes, which seems like more of a real discussion than choice 1 does. And, you know, it seems reasonable. I mean, if someone orders seafood 19 of 20 times eating at a restaurant, it seems perfectly reasonable that that person enjoys eating seafood. But if you think about it, there are 2 things in choice 2 that are both just, at the end of the day, that are both just guesses. Like, likes seafood is basically a guess. Like, we don't really know this. There are plenty of other reasonable reasons why this may have happened. Like Smith, like restaurant X may only be a seafood restaurant, except on special occasions. Yeah, they may not serve anything else. Maybe it's a health thing. Maybe Smith is on a certain diet where seafood is okay, but most meats are not. Maybe it's religious. You know, maybe Smith's religion or the religion of people with whom Smith eats prohibits other consumption of meat, but maybe not fish. Whatever, there's a lot of reasons, right? That are possible, of which this is only one reason. And then a premium means, the word premium means, it doesn't mean a lot of money. I mean, I personally, I think more than $10 is a lot of money to pay for dinner, but premium doesn't mean a lot. Premium means more than you pay for other things of the same type. So a premium would mean that Smith pays more for seafood than for other types of food, which is not necessarily true. Like an average of 75 doesn't really tell you more than at least 50. Because at least 50 could be $1,000 resident. So it's more interesting, but at the end of the day, it's basically a guess. It seems like a good guess, of course, but still, yeah. Choice 1 or A. I mean, I don't know that I would call choice B an opinion. I mean, it's a guess. It's an uncertain statement. It's a hypothesis is a better word for it. Because an opinion means that something at the end of the day is not fact. And I mean, choice 2 is, I mean, ultimately choice 2 would either be a fact or a false statement. Like, it's not really an opinion. Opinions are things like Smith pays too much for food. Which, that's not a factual statement, and that depends on people's personal views and values. Or like, seafood is disgusting is an opinion. Or this building is pretty is an opinion. Those are not statements of opinion. Those are potentially facts, but we just don't know if they're true. Choice one is less interesting. I mean, it's sort of boring. It's basically within the bounds of what's already discussed. It doesn't go anywhere new, but it must be true. Meaning that if we know the statements in the passage are true, then this is 100% guaranteed. Like there is absolutely no chance that choice one is wrong. Okay, so let's talk about this. Which one of these can ultimately be the correct answer on a standardized test that you have to give to hundreds of thousands of people every single year? And if you think about it, it's got to be this one. It's got to be the one that must be true. So this is the way that problems are going to work on the GMAT. Like when you have to draw the conclusion, you need to stay within the boundaries of what you are already told. So inside the box. And you have to pick the statement that must be true. And the other thing about this, I mean, this may remind you of inference questions in reading comprehension, and it probably should. The one thing that is an important difference from the reading comprehension question is that you will have to combine existing statements. So what I mean by inside the box is you're not thinking outside the box, like you're not introducing any new ideas. So, but in reading comprehension, you often find inferences by just going to a single statement and just sort of repackaging that one statement. Here, you're going to have to put two or more statements together. For instance, in this passage, we're combining the fact that there were 20 meals at this restaurant with the fact that only 19 of those meals were seafood. So 20 minus 19 is not 0, and that's why statement 2 has to be true, or statement 1 has to be true. So there it is. So these are the guidelines for when you have to draw a conclusion. Do not think outside the box. Must be true, and you've got to combine existing statements. So let's go back to ComCorp and talk about it with that in mind. So there's ComCorp. Let's talk about it. So remember, you will have to put statements together to reach your conclusion, and you will have to not go outside what is here. All right, so let's talk about what's in this passage. So there are no, I mean, I guess ComCorp sends out a bunch of things. So we got to talk about that. So what do we know? I mean, when it comes to things like this, you may want to make brief notes on what's here just so that you can stare at it in a form that's a little bit more amenable than a paragraph. So we know that Friday, if anything went out on Friday at all, it was not building supplies. Thursday, you had 5 special orders. Notice that it's not necessarily everything that went out on Thursday, but possibly among other things, you had 5 special orders, and that consisted entirely of building supplies. And then on a different vein, we're not talking about days of the week anymore. We're talking about this company called Truact. Sent 4 shipments. And didn't send any building supplies. Okay, and I mean, you could abbreviate this, perhaps ironically, you could abbreviate building supplies as BS. I mean, you should definitely abbreviate more than I'm doing right now. I'm just trying to make this easier for you guys to read. And notice the other thing, if you're a non-native speaker of the language, you may just have to be told once that this is a thing. But if you have the in front of a number, who can tell me what that means? Like if it says the 5 of something, what does that imply? Even if English is your first language, you still have to pay very close attention to things like that. But yeah, I think those are the only ones, right? So there were no special orders on any other day, except Thursday. So no special orders. There were no other special orders that week, apart from the 4 on Thursday. Okay, and that's what we know. And I mean, that's, normally you don't extract quite as much from so few words as you do there, but it does happen, and you have to pay attention to what the words say, so be careful with that. Okay, so which of the following must also be true? We have to combine existing statements and a statement but. So, okay, choice A, which was not so popular here. All of the shipments of building supplies were specially ordered. So, well, what do we know about this? We do know that the shipments of building supplies on Thursday were special orders. But the problem with choice A is that it's backwards. Because there could have been other building supplies that were not special orders. I mean, we do know that all of the special orders were building supplies. Now, as far as choice A goes, all of the SOs of special orders were building supplies. If it said that, that would be true. But vice versa, this statement is that statement in reverse. And that's not necessarily a thing. So, because there just as well could have been plenty of other shipments on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday that were building supplies that were not specially ordered. So it doesn't have to be true. It's kind of like, if you can think of a reasonable objection, then it doesn't have to be true. It's kind of like Smith could have eaten at restaurant X because it's a seafood restaurant. Same sort of thing. They could have shipped out plenty of orders of building supplies in the beginning of the week. B says none of ComCorp supplies were sent to Truax. What we know about Truax was that they didn't order any building supplies. So in fact, this doesn't rule out anything like B. I mean, this doesn't show anything like B at all. We'll get there in a sec. I mean, B says that they didn't order building supplies. We certainly don't know that. I mean, in fact, the shipments on Friday were specifically shipments not of building supplies. So, and Truax also did not order building supplies. So it's perfectly possible that Friday's orders could have gone to Truax. So, just extract the right information here, right? B says Friday's orders were not building supplies. Truax did not order building supplies. So Truax could have received Friday's orders. Not necessarily. We don't know that for sure. But it's certainly possible. Okay. The 5, yeah, just really quickly, let me just paste this on a new page. Can you explain the new 5? Yeah, so if you have the in front of a number, this is important enough that it's definitely worth a slide of its own here, so let's just talk about it. If you have the plus number plus noun, this implies that these are or were the only ones of this noun. So an example will make this pretty easy to understand. If I say Joe and Amber were two witnesses to the crime, I mean, this is not an exclusive statement. This means that Joe and Amber did see the crime happen, but there could have been hundreds of others who also saw the crime happen. On the other hand, if I wrote that Joe and Amber were the two witnesses to the crime, then that implies that absolutely no one except for Joe and Amber saw the crime happen. They were the only two witnesses. So in general, the blah, 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 in front of a number of something implies that exclusive. So if you think about that, conveniently to ask the question at this point, it's not primarily, although certain things will, the question is the session primarily for second language speakers? I mean, not really, but in fact not at all, but if a topic comes up that is legitimately less understood by second language speakers, then it'll be addressed in such a way. You know, like if someone's first language is English, they're basically just going to know this without really thinking about it. I mean, there's still an issue of reading carefully and not going so fast that you don't see this. But if your first language is English and you see the five, blah, 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 you'll just sort of get that. So, Kumi, you can't write that because you can't do that. I mean, if you write the two dogs that fell sick, then sure. But not, if you have four dogs, then you can't say the two. So, all right, let's talk about C. C says none of Truax's shipments were special orders. Well, let's talk about this. So all of the special orders were on Thursday. So you actually do need to notice the five here. The five special orders were all on Thursday. And all of them were building supplies. So in other words, there were no special orders that were not building supplies. But Truax's orders were, none of them were building supplies. So if we aggregate those facts here, we do have to put those together. But if you're assembling two statements, that's also a good sign. Because remember, as we noticed, you absolutely have to do that. You cannot just restate one of the statements. So all of the special orders were building supplies. But none of the Truax orders were building supplies. So this statement absolutely must be true, because we know that the Truax orders were not the special orders, because one of those were building supplies, the other ones were definitely not. The other statements, none of them on Thursday was sent to Truax Construction. Well, because the thing is, there could have still been other orders on Thursday. So we do know that there were no special orders other than the ones on Thursday, but we do not know that the special orders were exclusively what went out on Thursday. Like, there could have been hundreds of non-special orders on Thursday. So D is not a thing. And then E, so just for completeness, we'll write it on here. D, there could have been other orders on Thursday besides the special orders. And then E says all of Concorde's shipments of building supplies went out on Thursday. This has the same problem that A does, which is that we don't know. There could have been lots of other shipments of building supplies at various points during the week. So we have no idea of whether other building supplies went out earlier in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So any questions about this? If you have any, type them in the box. Let me just, for the sake of completeness, let me go back to this topic here. We did this question in the board, so I may as well answer it. You can't say the 2 dogs if you only have 4, unless you are qualifying the dogs. Like, unless you are saying that are some condition that doesn't apply to the other 2. Like, for instance, if you say we have 4 dogs, the 2 with short noses are less able to tolerate heat, are less tolerant of heat than the others. I mean, then you can do this, because now what you are saying is, even if you have 4 dogs, what you're saying now is that there are only 2 dogs that have short noses. And you're exclusively talking about those 2 right now. In other words, the other 2 don't have short noses. There are only 2 that do. That's what that means. But if you just say the 2, that doesn't make any sense because you have 4. So it has to be the 2 that satisfy some sort of qualifier. Okay. And now I'm not really sure what you are asking there. ComCorp is the company that sends out things in this passage. So if you say their shipments versus shipments by them, those are not different. So FYI. If you have any other questions, feel free. If not, we'll go to another one. Again, this is sort of, it's kind of annoying, but this is not, the one thing about these kinds of questions is that they are not like anything else that you're going to do on this test. Because the rest of critical reasoning is not like this. It's not rigorous. It's not, it must be true. It's not stay inside the box. Most of critical reasoning is kind of applying common sense to real world type of situation. This is less so because you are actually trying to prove things, which is an entirely different animal, basically. So, all right, let's take a look at another one. Let's look at this one. How about that? Okay, remember where multiple choice answers are found. Multiple choice answers are found here. This one's shorter than the other one, so I'll give you a little bit less time. Here's the timer. Go for it. Okay, most of you don't have answers yet, so maybe take another 30 seconds or so to answer this thing, but not too much longer. We've still got a lot of people who don't have answers to this. So if you're still actually thinking in a way that is goal-oriented and productive, then by all means continue for a little bit. But if you're just sort of randomly poking around and making guesses at this point, then you want to just make a guess and get on with it. While you're finishing up the recording thing, I am completely not involved with the posting of the recordings. So there is, the most recent session hasn't been posted yet. That was the 23rd. The 16th was canceled because I had a situation arise and couldn't make it. But the 23rd is not yet posted. Presumably will be posted at some point soon. I can shoot tech an email and ask them what the story is there, because they usually post them within a few days, so it's been a week. I can ask them about that. Here are your answers to this thing. Again, if you don't have an answer by this point, that's a problem. You really should. But again, we have no clear majority here at all, other than people know that A is not a thing. So And I mean, you can pretty quickly eliminate A here because this passage doesn't even talk at all about length of stay. Right, like the only thing that is discussed here is the number of tourists. So, I mean, what's interesting about this is that people did not also immediately eliminate B. Because if you think about this, you can only discuss things that have to do with tourists or hotels, but not really like number of tourists or actual presence or absence of hotels. But you can't think of anything else, really, because those are not things. So you can quick eliminations here. You guys were on board with the quick elimination of A, because average length of stay is not discussed. And then as far as B goes, B and D should also be quick eliminations here, because we just know about number of tourists, but there's no relationship necessarily to the size of the hotels themselves. Because, I mean, we don't know that hotels are filled to capacity here, nor is there any reasonable reason to assume that they are. So, because B and D are about how big the hotels actually are, and we don't know that that's a thing. I mean, all we know is about the number of tourists that are staying in these places. So, length of stay, not a thing. Larger hotel, smaller hotel, also not a thing. Because, I mean, a larger hotel is not the same thing as having more tourists stay there. For at least two reasons. The first is that we don't know what percent of capacity these things are booked, and we also don't know how many people are staying in each room. So, I mean, those are both issues. You know, if you like spring break in Daytona Beach, you're going to have 8 people in every room. So even if it were filled with capacity, you would still have issues. So, but okay, now let's talk about the remaining two choices. So, well, what are the facts that we know? So we know that, what do we know? Well, we know that the total number of tourists in Springfield is greater than the total number of tourists in Harristown. But then we know that one of the hotels in Harristown has more tourists than one of the hotels in Springfield. So, tourists at one hotel in Springfield, which is the Royal Arms, that's a smaller number than the tourists at one hotel, which is unnamed in the passage, in Harristown. I mean, as for whether you should write this down, as I said, on these kinds of passages, it may be a good idea. I mean, in general, I would not recommend taking notes on these passages in critical reasoning, but on these kinds of passages, it's a different story, because this is the one kind of question type that is on critical reasoning that is not, at the end of the day, basically common sense related or based on everyday thinking. But the other types of questions are all based on the kind of regular, flexible thinking that you would do out there on planet Earth. These are not. I mean, people don't walk out there every day in the real world and start combining statements in logically rigorous ways. It's not necessarily an everyday task. I mean, in fact, arguably, it's the other way around. Like, when you think about everyday ways of combining statements, most people with the sort of common sense thinking will actually produce results like number 2 here, like Smith likes seafood. So in this kind of problem, taking notes may be a good way to present in a more clear form what facts you have available to use, is what I'm saying. So yeah, it's like what Jimmy says there. It makes it easier to see what facts you have. So if you have a hard time keeping track of what you do and don't know, then you may want to consider taking notes. As opposed to the other types of critical reasoning passages where I would very strongly recommend against taking notes unless you are confused. So, yeah. Okay. So the deal is that we know the total tourists in Springfield has to be greater than total tourists in Harris Town, H-Town, Houston, whatever. So the point is, and I mean, notice that Springfield and Harristown are not real places here. There are a lot of Springfields. I'm just going to make these San Antonio and Houston because it'll just make it easier for me to think that. So let's make this San Antonio, and let's make this Houston. That's a typo. Fix that in a second. Okay. I mean, because if you can personalize anything at all in any way whatsoever, like San Antonio and Houston are places I've actually been to and that I know something about. So if you can involve yourself, even only by, including the names of towns you actually know, personalize the passage in any way whatsoever, it will be much easier to think about. So, if you are from India, maybe make them Hyderabad and Delhi instead of San Antonio and Houston. So, something. If you're from Russia, make them Moscow, St. Petersburg, or maybe smaller towns in Russia. Or maybe make them Verkhoyansk and Vladikavkaz in Siberia, whatever. Just something that is a thing. So, San Antonio has this one hotel that doesn't have as many people as this one hotel in Houston. But, you have to have more tourists in the city of San Antonio staying in hotels. So, basically, what you get out of this is, for San Antonio to have more people in hotels, this is not enough. So, yeah, this is not enough to give San Antonio the overall edge. Okay. In other words, now look at what you're trying to do. Maybe the other thing that was an issue here is that people misread the task itself. The task is actually to pick the statement that must be false this time. And it must be true that the region that the report is in error. In other words, it must be true that it is false. The report must be in error. So for that to be true, you're looking for a statement that must be false. So what must be false? Kind of unusual, but you need to pick out the statement that has to be a lie. So, well, you think about these. A is gone, B is gone, D is gone, because they all talk about things that have basically nothing to do with anything. C must be true. I mean, C is a thing that is absolutely and positively true, not false. C must be true. Because, I mean, C says that you have more tourists staying in the entire city of Houston than you do in the Royal Arms in San Antonio. I mean, if you think about this, there are already more of them in this one hotel in Houston than there are in the entire city, and than there are in the entire hotel in the Royal Arms. So that's just one hotel in Houston. So, of course, if you look at everybody in all of Houston, that's going to be even more bigger, so to speak, than this. Because this is already enough. So C is something that must absolutely be true. Now, on the other hand, and I mean, if it said which of the following is okay, then that's okay. But remember that we want a false statement, not a true statement. Okay, so E says that the Royal Arms is the only hotel in San Antonio. Well, that cannot be true because there has to be tourists staying somewhere else in order for this to work. So, I mean, if it's just the Royal Arms, then you don't even have enough tourists to beat this one hotel that's in Houston, much less the entire city of Houston. So you definitely need more places for tourists to stay if you want there to be more tourists in San Antonio. So E is false. So the brochure says the one hotel. Yeah, but Vlad, I think you may be reading that statement backwards. I mean, the brochure says that the one hotel in Houston has more people. If the brochure said this, other way around, if the brochure said the Royal Arms had more people, then we would not know. Because then it would be possible that this was some gigantically huge, amazing hotel that had more rooms than the entire city of Houston. But if this is this is a smaller hotel. So if the city as a whole has more tourists, that means there must be other ones too. If you were limited to the Royal Arms, then this hotel in Houston alone would already beat it. So there you go. I see people stay in hotels in Springfield, not in one. That's also a thing. I mean, I don't know that you could generally pick at language like that, although that is an interesting point. Like the fact that they pluralize hotels. That's actually not a bad observation at all. I don't think they would have written hotels plural if that were allowed, although you should make sure that you do have premises that justify what you're going to say. So I like that observation, and I think that you have something there. I think that you have a point. Although you should make sure that you can find statements to back that up. I mean, because if your whole argument revolves around linguistic picking, then that's kind of not so great. But if that's your first hint, that's actually an excellent observation. So, cool. I see that you're still typing something. So, wait a couple of seconds to see what you're typing. But I mean, I guess, you know, the one thing with hotels being plural is that, okay, I guess you're not typing something. The only thing with hotels being plural is that we don't, you know, how else would you write that? Like, if you're not sure whether there's one hotel or more, you would still probably use a plural here. So just make sure that you actually have statements that really justify. And make sure it's not just language that you're using. And make sure it's actually hard facts that justify whatever it is that you write. Okay, let's take a look at another one. How about that one? Remember two things. Don't forget multiple choice answers. There they are. And then also don't forget what the goal of the problem is. Okay. Okay, you guys, y'all, let's go ahead and pick something. If you don't have an answer yet, about 10 of you don't. If you don't have an answer yet, go ahead and pick one. Even if you're guessing, that's how they roll on this test. So let's pick a thing, please. Okay, so here are the choices that you picked. Right there. So it looks like A and B are crowd favorites. Let's take a look and see. So remember, you're looking for thinking inside the box, and you're looking for what must be true. So one thing that you can and should do before you even get started looking at a statement is you may want to define what is the box in the first place. What actually is the box? In other words, like, within what boundaries do we have to stay with these statements? Must the statements stay? So, well, let's look at what we're talking about here. So the problem talks about coal output per miner for what? And to what does this statistic apply? Coal output per miner where, or in what group of things, or in what overall collective of miners? Chat box. Like, on what scale is this statement made? So existing mines, does this apply? Yeah, it's the entire coal industry, right? So it's not individual mines. That's very, very important to realize that anything dealing with individual mines, guys, is not a thing. So, I mean, there's a statement about the only statement, like, we are only looking at aggregate statistics for the country's entire coal industry. And then what we're talking about is output per miner, which means that whenever you have output per miner, it means that total output is also relevant, and number of miners is also relevant. Because that's how per statistics work. Output per miner times miners would be total output. So the box of this passage, the boundaries that you must stay in, are aggregate statistics and these particular statistics especially. So if you think about these statements, now make sure you notice how if and any type of statements work. So these kinds of things, let's make sure we know how these work. Let's take these to the next page real quick just to talk about how this kind of thing works. I don't know how to give you a rule for this, so the best thing I can do is to just give you some sort of illustration. So, for example, let's say I tell you the following. Make sure you know how to use if and any statement. So if I tell you that there is no snow on the ground, okay, if I know this, then I'm going to give you two statements that are both true. The first statement is, number one, if snow fell today, then it has evaporated, melted, or been removed. Statement two, which is also true, is any snow that may have fallen, any snow that has fallen today has evaporated, melted, or been removed. I mean, notice that neither of these statements implies that any snow actually fell. Like, in other words, there's no snow on the ground. You know what this means. This means that either it is gone for the three reasons mentioned here, or it just never fell in the first place. But when you say if blah, 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 or any things that do this, you are not implying the presence of those things. Right? Make sure you understand that about these statements. Like either one of these things these do not imply that or require in any sort of way that there was snow today. Like we could be in the middle of the desert in the summer and these statements are still true. So these statements do not require snow to have fallen today. Like they're only talking about the situation if snow fell today. If no snow fell today, then these statements are automatically true. So just make sure you know this, even if they are absolutely absurd statements. Like if no snow fell today, then absolutely any statement in the world starting with any snow that fell today is automatically true. So, for example, if I tell you that any snow that fell today was eaten up by pink unicorns from the sky, if it did not snow today, that is a true statement. Because if nothing was there, I can make up whatever I want to about it, and it's true. So, I mean, they're not going to do that to you, but just so that you know, you do not have to consider cases of things that did not happen when you have statements like this. So just think about how these work. It's going to be very awkward to make any kind of rule about this in rule form. But if you understand these two statements, we are good here. So in other words, in A, you do not have to actually assume the number of miners remain constant. But we're just talking about if that were a thing. So we know that coal output overall is twice what it used to be. So A, we know overall coal output is twice what it was. Remember, in these statements, we only have to consider the case in which it actually snowed. In this statement, we only have to consider the case in which the number of miners has been a constant. So if the number of miners is the same, well, think about what that means, right? Because overall output is basically number of miners times output per miner. So output is equal to number of miners times output per miner. So if this is the same, then this must be exactly twice as much as it used to be, because otherwise there's no way that the product could have doubled. So A is the statement that must be true. We'll look at the others in a second. If you missed part of the session, the recordings are on that page forever and ever. Like the web page for Thursdays with Ron, there's only one web page for Thursdays, and the recordings stay up there forever and ever and ever, amen. So yeah, you'll be able to find it. It'll be there soon. I don't know exactly what soon is because our tech department is responsible for posting those recordings, but it'll be up there at some point reasonably soon. Okay, so A has to be true. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box. As far as B, if you had a coal mine that achieved one mine, see, this is the problem with B. I mean, the problem with B is we don't know anything at all about individual mines. At all. I mean, all we know about is the industry as a whole. If this is too abstract, then what you should do is you should make an analogy that is not so abstract. You know, like let's say that you're, I don't know, let's say that you're talking about students at a high school who are doing science projects. I mean, this is saying that if, you know, the number of science projects per student in our district is now twice what it was. So A is saying that if there are the same number of students in our schools, then there are exactly twice as many total science projects, which is totally a thing. I mean, if you have the same number of kids and they are doing twice as many science projects, then you will have twice as many science projects. Definitely a thing. The number of children per family in our town is twice as much as it was 5 years ago, even though there are no new families. Okay, well, if the number of families in town is the same, then the total number of kids is double. That makes sense too. I mean, make the analogies that you have to make for this to work. Because B would be about individual families. Like B would be if you had, I don't know, like an extended family that had more babies, and they must have also had more women having babies. Well, we don't know that. If you had one school in our district that had more science projects, they must have also had more science projects per kid. Again, we don't know that, because an individual school could have had more kids. Overall, the district didn't, but one school we don't know. Same thing with B. We know that overall this would have to be true, but it does not have to extend to the case of individual minds. So if you have questions about that, feel free. Meanwhile, we'll talk about the other questions, the other answer choices. The migrate to other minds. Blood, we don't, yeah, where are you going with that is the question. Like, I don't see how that certainly could have been a thing, but that doesn't really affect A or B. Judy, I have absolutely no idea what you're asking me. I'm sorry, but maybe you could rephrase that in a way that is more concrete, please. Choice C, if any new mines had opened in the past 5 years. I mean, so C is a completely hypothetical statement about something that did not happen. So that's not a thing. I mean, C is talking about something we just don't know at all, right? Like, this statement hypothesizes something, hypothesizes the consequences of something that didn't actually happen. So we have no idea. We have no idea at all. Like, I mean, C is kind of like saying this, that there is no snow on the ground. Choice C on the last page would be like saying this. Is like saying, if there were snow on the ground, then cars would be getting into more accidents. And I mean, we of course have no idea, right? We have no idea what would happen at all if there were more snow on the ground, because there's not. So it's not a thing. The consequences of that are completely unknown. And D, if any individual mine has not increased its output. So again, you're talking about individual mines, so honestly, we just don't even need to go there. Same thing as this. We only have aggregate statistics. We don't have individual statistics. And then E, in this country, the cost of producing a given quantity of coal, the cost of production is not a thing. So those purple things, B, D, E, those are quick eliminations, because those are things that are not in the box that we discussed here. They're not aggregate statistics, and they are not limited to these things. Like choice E is discussing statistics of cost, which are not these. And choices B and D are discussing non-aggregate individual statistics, which jumps outside this box. So any questions, feel free. Janine, if you want to explain what you mean by parallel reasoning, you certainly can. I don't know what that means. So, but all right, let's take a look at at least one more here. And how about, let's see. How about this one? I might even get to do two more depending on timing. Try that. one's not as long, so I'll give you a little bit less time. Okay. All right, let's try to pick something in the next few seconds, maybe 10, 20 seconds. Okay, so let's take a look. It looks like a few people actually switched their answers, which is okay. I remember when you take the real test, you don't just pick an answer. You actually have to pick an answer and then confirm it. So that, unfortunately, that is the one thing that probably makes time management 10 times as difficult as otherwise would be, because people who time management, for the most part, consists of not sitting there and staring and wondering what the answer is. It consists of basically just picking something and moving on. So, you know, if you are one of those people who likes to just deliberate, then time management is already a problem, and having to confirm your answer may make it more of a problem. But let's take a look. So, what do we know here? Well, I mean, I don't know if I would take notes necessarily on this because the passage is clear enough, right? There's not a lot of words there. The point is that we have increases in the consumption of fish and poultry. What you should notice, okay, like when you look at statistics, we've had actually a couple of Thursday sessions exclusively about critical reasoning involving statistics. You may want to take a look at that. But you absolutely should not have to do any sort of complex mathematical reasoning. Because, you know, there's a different section of the test for that. It's called the quant section. So you don't have to do it here. I mean, basically, you shouldn't have to do much more than trivial mathematical reasoning. For example, the last problem, if you have twice as many people and the same production per person, then you have twice as much total production. I mean, that's not very hard. I mean, basically, this is more common sense than it is mathematical reasoning. That's the most math you should ever have to do. Is math that you can do without even doing math. Like, basically, that's a good way to say it. I mean, if you can just see the result without having to actually do out the mathematics, then you're good. If you actually have to work out something algebraic in order to see this, then that is trouble. Do I recommend reading the answers in any particular order? I mean, not necessarily, because you're just looking for the one that you have to prove. I'm not sure why. I mean, I might be misunderstanding your question because it doesn't matter what order you read them in. I mean, you may as well just go in the order that's there. But maybe you're asking something else. Okay, what you should pay attention to is two things, especially to two things, which are, number one, the nature of the statistics being chosen. So if, for example, a per capita statistic is much different from a total statistic, especially notable differences. For example, total X versus X per capita. And then you should also pay attention to comparative statistics. In other words, like this thing is greater than that thing. Okay, so those are two things that you should pay attention to. So notice when we're talking about comparative statistics here, I mean, you may as well, yeah, check them all out. I mean, it couldn't hurt. So it shouldn't take too long to really check out the others, especially if you already have one in mind. Okay, comparative statistics. So, I mean, if you look at this, you've got fish consumption did not keep pace with population growth, whereas poultry did. In fact, poultry surpassed population growth. That's what you could get out of this. The percents are unimportant. So comparative statistics in this passage. The first one is that fish consumption did not keep pace with population growth. Poultry consumption did. In fact, poultry consumption increased at a rate that surpassed population growth. Okay, I mean, those are the only two things that are terribly worth noticing here. And Al, if you have a hard time remembering the information, then one of two things. The first is you may be trying to remember too much information. Because if you, for example, in a passage like this, trying to remember all three percentages would be well beyond what my brain would be capable of, but I'm just looking at comparatives instead. So you may have to pare down the information in front of you into something simpler. Or you might just want to take brief notes and look at them. I mean, there is something also to be said for just writing brief notes on things like this. Because when you write stuff down, not only is it there in front of your eyes, but also, just as importantly, there are actually studies to show that the actual act of writing something down is enough to help you remember it a little bit better. So you can, if you really have issues with it, then try to write a few notes. Okay, so notice what we don't really know anything about here. I mean, these are totally aggregate statistics. I mean, we have no idea how any of this was distributed among the population. So these are aggregate again. There are lots of things that we have absolutely no idea about. So let's talk about a few things that we don't know about. The first thing is, it does say that population growth included some immigration, but we don't have any idea what sort of behaviors were distributed between immigrants and just, new children of natives. So differences between immigrants and new native children. Because I mean, it says only in part immigration. What this means is that the population also had more children. Otherwise, this would not just be in part. This would be all of it if that were not true. So we don't know about those differences. We also don't know anything about how behavioral changes, or in this case, dietary changes, were distributed among the population. I mean, in other words, if these dietary changes occurred while there was immigration, we have absolutely no idea if they had anything to do with the immigrants. So we don't know this stuff. So let's take a look at some of these choices. Profits, not a thing. I mean, profits are not in this passage at all. So we can eliminate A pretty quickly and efficiently because money is not discussed in any sort of way at all here. So forget choice A. Choice B. Oh, and the other thing we don't know anything about, remember when we think about this kind of thing, another difference that's notable is increases versus actual values of something. So changes versus actual values. Like, we don't know anything about that either. Like, we have no idea of the actual amounts of things like poultry and fish that people eat. So, poultry or fish consumed. I mean, we just know that these things change by X number of percent. But I mean, if this is not clear, then imagine instead of fish that this said caviar. You know, caviar is not normally something that people eat lots and lots and lots of. So, you know, or if you change poultry to caviar. You know, I mean, if caviar consumption increases by 9%, that certainly does not mean that people are eating as much caviar as they are of whatever this is. So, I mean, these could have started at big and small values, respectively, and they might stay there. B, we just don't know about B, right? Because these are entire population level changes. I mean, these changes could have occurred entirely within the non-immigrant population. You know, like, these could be entirely separate observations. So, for example, if you, like, let's say that fish got expensive more quickly than chicken did. You know, then these percentage increases could just be entirely due to those price changes in society as a whole. Like, there's no reason to think that immigrants brought these percent changes. It certainly does not have to be true. So, C is addressed by what we said about caviar. I mean, the relative amounts of these things are completely unknown. Like, it's possible that the fish consumption went from a really tiny number to another tiny number, and that poultry went from a big number to another number, or vice versa. We have no idea. You know, if you replace poultry with caviar, it's pretty clear why C is not a thing. Same thing with D. I mean, again, replace poultry with caviar, and you will get it. I mean, the actual regular part of their diet means that these were large amounts. And again, we totally don't know that. I mean, this could have gone from a microscopic amount to another bigger microscopic amount. We don't know. As far as E goes, I mean, E is an aggregate statistic. It's in the entire country of Germania, which is what we need. If you think about it, the fish consumption didn't keep pace with population growth. I mean, per capita consumption is found by dividing fish consumption by population. So if you divide a number that's only 4.5% bigger by a number that is 6% bigger, you're going to get a smaller fraction than you got the first time. Because the denominator grew faster than I mean, if we write the fraction out, it might be easier to think about it. It's fish consumption divided by population. For this fraction to remain the same, you would have to have equal percent changes. Like, if fish consumption went up 6% and population went up 6%, then this would remain exactly the same. If it's not clear, then just think about an actual population increase of 6% and think about those people eating the same amount of fish. Then the fish consumption will go up also 6%. So, but this grew at a slower rate than this did, which means that this fraction went down. So E is definitely a thing. If there are any questions, feel free. We got to wrap up here pretty soon. But you do have, but think about how per capita consumption is defined. I mean, per capita consumption is defined by dividing these two quantities. I mean, I know we can't, man, we're already 5 minutes past closing time. Fish consumption divided by population. So if you have these things in the passage, then this is also within the box. I mean, because as long as you are it's kind of like with Smith and the seafood restaurant, like this thing. I mean, what you're saying when you say that is kind of like saying that I would eliminate number one because the passage did not explicitly talk about not eating seafood. You're right, it doesn't explicitly talk about it, but it's there. It's implied. I mean, if I have the total number of times at the restaurant, and I also have the times when seafood was a thing, then by subtracting those, I would have the time when it's not. Very analogously here, if I have information about population and I have information about overall consumption of fish, then by combining those two things, specifically by division, the per capita consumption is also in the box of the passage. So glad I don't even know what a reflexive pronoun is, and also there's no time for that. But terminology for grammar is not something that I know pretty much at all. So, yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. We got to wrap it up. Next session is actually, make sure you know, the next session is not actually for 3 weeks from now. It's February 20th. So there's no session on the 6th or the 13th. So we have 3 weeks between now and the next session. That's it. So have a good 3 weeks. And as far as the recordings are concerned, I'll go ahead and check into that. I mean, those will be up sooner rather than later, I'm sure, at some point. But the